This program is brought to you by Emory University.
That's to keep both of us sane so that you don't have, all of them to do in the last 2 weeks of class, and I don't have all of them.
John's job is almost impossible to do all of these classes. The ones you've already accomplished, John.
And Pat, also, I did ask her about the minutes. She didn't respond. She saw that post. I think it's going to be fine with her. If you were in New York and you saw something on Broadway, I think that's good. Acceptable.
The question has been raised by some folks, and maybe Tom, right? If you have special privilege, you have two guests here to talk about creativity and collaboration. And as you notice, we have this camera in the room. In agreement with iTunes, Emory has an arrangement that allows us to record things and to put them up at iTunes University so that people can watch them later, people can watch them from other places, all that sort of thing. So this is one of those conversations, and you get to be a privileged audience, particularly when we come to questions later on in the show. So we have John Ammerman, who is Artistic Director of Theatre Emory, and you all please feel free to get up. And Jon Ludwig, who is the Artistic Director of the Puppetry Center and the Director of Frankenstein. John, unless something terrible happens immediately, have had a long relationship, and we hope neither one falls in a hole and it can't. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Wow. Well, collaboration. I was kind of trying to figure out what would be sort of the best starting point to discuss something about collaboration. And of course, John and I worked together many years ago as actors to start with. And that's how we met and started sort of our artistic association. And then finding opportunities in later years to actually come back around and collaborate in other realms, which of course this particular production of Frankenstein, I found myself in a position to actually approach John to collaborate, if you will, on a specific project. So I was trying to think, well, so what was that all about? But I really think it's sort of based on the fact that collaboration often starts with friendships, familiarity, knowing each other's work, and wanting to put our collective artistic minds together to actually create something that we both can gain something from, as well as perhaps find a new artistic voice in that collaboration. So that's sort of one of the things I was thinking about initially, of how we get into the mix of it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, if you're planning on collaborating with somebody or any other group or something like that, ask yourself if this is somebody you'd go out and like have a beer with or have coffee with, because there's a dating process, I think, for collaborating. You have to kind of know each other, and it's really important to kind of see if you fit, because I've been in collaborations with people where you find out a little bit too late it didn't really fit. So there's a lot of friction. So yeah, my advice is go out for a coffee, with somebody first, and then find out, can you stand them, and
Yeah, because it really is. It has to do with a lot of trust in what you're doing, exchange of ideas, also the willingness to sort of compromise and find a workable ground to actually build on those particular ideas. If you're always in conflict, which collaborations do tend to result in.
Yeah, and some people work well. I'm sorry, but some people work well that way. Some people are very combative, and it kind of gets the sparks going. But I find it kind of exhausting in a way too. I have a question about collaboration. Who all here has either worked on the show or is in the show or lifted a hammer, did anything? Could you stand up? Who actually did something? You stood up. If you're in the show, worked on it, did anything, Thank you all. That's collaboration. You came in here, you gave your time, you work as a team, you did, I mean, it was, every time I came in here, it was like an army of ants, just building this behemoth of a set. It's big, it was really big. And I kept trying to explain, you know, every time, it's really big, believe me, this show is really big. Lists of props like this, huge, and John always was like, yeah, okay, yeah, we can do that. Yeah, okay, we'll do it. We can do it. And that's the other part of collaboration, too, is you have to be realistic about it. You know, too easy that you want to please the other person, and you're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. And then you have to be realistic and say, okay, we have this amount of time, and this is what we can do and this is what we can't do. Honesty is very important in collaborations. You have to be very honest up front.
Well, I think it's interesting, too, like, for instance, you working at the Puppet Center, and you basically have a team of artists that you're really used to working with, and from project to project, so that familiarity is something that's very comfortable, and you have your own vocabulary and your process of doing things. And I wonder, in a sense, how you respond to, for instance, coming into a situation like this that's away from the center, and you're dealing with a lot of people that you don't know very well, although there's some familiar, you know, the set designer you're familiar with, and a few other you know, technical artists that you're familiar with, or, you know, musicians, for example.
Right.
But it's still sort of different in the way your environment's different. And I just wondered, what kind of sensibility do you sort of...
Well, you give me some really good advice. You said baby steps. Just go baby steps. Take little steps. Don't expect everything all at once. And trust that it's going to happen. And it did, of course. I mean, I knew it would. But knowing the enormity of it, I always felt kind of terrible. Because it's like, you don't understand how big this is. There's so much stuff. And it all is really important in the show. Every little piece tells the story. So, yeah, the comfort zone is like, it wasn't, you don't know the folks, but every day you learn, like, God, they're so talented. Like, the cast was amazing. I mean, they were fantastic. They remembered everything. The crew, everybody, the designers. You know, it's just, you sit back and go, okay, it's going to happen. It will happen. You have to trust. It's so important. I mean, courage and trust. It's like that Moss Hart line. You know, the more important than talent or anything else is just courage to keep going. And what gives me the courage is the fact that I trusted John. I've seen a lot of, you know, Theatre Emory's work, so I knew they could do big. I know y'all can do big, so it wasn't ever a question of, gee, they'll ever get this done.
Yeah, it's...
Because I knew you were.
You know, you and I mean, we talk and converse and are friends, and so that sort of element of the relationship was, you know, pretty firm and stable. But I can only imagine when you come into a circumstance when you're with a lot of other people who know each other, and yet you're at the helm of the project. Right,
you're sort of the new member in the ensemble. You don't know the lingo or the language or how things are done, and it's amazing with the university. Again, like with just the student help. I mean, I was amazed every day. It'd be like this, like I said, an army just building Santa's workshop. You know, just.
So in this case, so I guess the question I was leaning toward as a result of that was this sense of if you're not working with a grounded team of people that you're used to and coming into a new environment, I mean, it does really have sort of, does it create anxiety in the sense of, what do I have to do to keep the whole picture?
More for me is like, how do I communicate? Because like you've built up with people you've worked with a lot, you just immediately go, they know your language, they understand what you're saying immediately. With others, you always feel like, what language is going to another, like it's going to another island, and they speak a different language. You have to go like, well, and what's the currency? How do I explain, you know? Thank you is a good one. That kind of is universal. I tried to say thank you as much as I could. One, because I had a lot to be thankful for. Because, I mean, it was a miracle, and it's amazing to me. It's just amazing. This is actually like almost 3 times as big as the original production. It's just gigantic. So, there you have it.
Yeah.
So I always say thank you. It's really important.
The also, you know, in looking at something like a project, collaboration, a project always has its own weight, its own importance, how desperately you want to get it done and for it to be good, and well done and have some kind of statement to be made. And I'm always sort of amazed in looking at professional theater companies, and particularly film companies, where they have a core of artists that they like to work with. And a lot of that has to do with this trust you're talking about. I can trust them. I know the kind of work they'll do. I like working with them. Their attitudes are good. They come prepared. There's a series of virtues, if you will, within sort of the core of what gets organized initially for a project, because the value of the project is so important. You don't want to take too many risks with the very people who you are relying on. And so I know for years, being in a Shakespeare festival, I've often had friends tell me, well, somebody has to die before somebody gets into that company. And in a sense, you know, it was sort of it was kind of a backhanded compliment, a forehanded slap, I'm not sure which. But in a sense, there was a great truism about that, and that, you know, many theater companies have their core, and that's who they deal with because of that trust element and the types that they are and what they contribute and the sense of encouragement and camaraderie and all the other things that happen in the mix of a theater company. So in that sense, the collaboration is something that's very deeply grounded. Now you could probably comment about this too when putting a project together. How crucial it is to put the right pieces together, you know, that has as much to do with personalities as it does with creativity.
Right. Yeah, no, it's especially working on an original, if it's something brand new. And I do a lot of original work too, you know, from scratch. So a lot of it's playwriting and staging all at the same time. And you need people who are just gamers, I find, who are willing to try anything at any point, you know, because you're just discovering what could happen. You have sort of a blueprint, but you need people who are explorers. It's very important, I find, in the kind of work that I do, because it's never been done before. Nobody's ever done, we only did this play once before. This is kind of unusual because it's actually been done before. Most of what I've done has never been done before. And so I need people who I don't have to explain anything to them. They can help discover it on the way. It's kind of like you have a map, kind of, and you're sort of sailing off in some direction. I guess it's like people that follow explorers. I mean, why would you get on the boat if you thought they were crazy? You know, you just stay home. You know, Columbus would have just stayed. Nobody would have gone with him. He would have had a canoe, maybe. But, you know, I mean, it does. You have to have a team that can help you get there. So it's, yeah, it's essential, and the right people. I was reading something about Mike Nichols, you know, and I think he's a brilliant director, and he basically summed it up in a kind of graphic way. I can't use the same language, but he said, don't work with bleeps, you know, jerks, basically. He put it a little more strongly, but I think he said, like, even one props person can just ruin the whole thing if they're really in a bad mood. The person can really bring everything down. So you have to work with people who are into the project, and find their value and worth in the exploration. You know, Columbus, like a good example, he gets all the credit, but there were all these other people who helped sail the boat and everything else. Columbus was a jerk too, but we won't go into the history of Columbus. It's all I can think of at the moment. I'm not sure Magellan was any better.
Do you think, like, different projects, you come up with a new, let's say you find a book and you read the book and you decide, you know, I think this would make a great puppet play. Are there, for instance, certain people that pop into your mind immediately?
Sure.
That it could be a designer for this particular story, or it could be a composer for this other particular thing that seem to be a very important, integral part of where you think it's going to go, that they could.
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, you have to pick it on, like, the person's personality and their talents, and it can be very subtle. Sometimes it's just really like, okay, I need live music rather than pre-recorded. I know a lot of composers, they're really brilliant musicians, okay composers. Some guys are brilliant composers, but they take some 5 hours to plunk out a chord. And you know, that's a very simple, but that's kind of, you know, the basic, how does the person work? What are their methods? How fast? Are they right for it? Building an ensemble. You know?
Yeah, and you really don't want to go into something like that with a recommendation necessarily.
Oh my gosh, no, recommendations are hard. In Atlanta too, I know that everybody talks to each other. There's a lot of like, okay, you call somebody, what was it like to work with so and so, and there's a lot of, you know, in person's opinions can mean an awful lot whether you get hired. I guess it's probably everywhere. The kind of, you know, relationship. Like I saw this person. I go and see a lot of plays, and I see a lot of the actors, and I'll be curious. I always take a checklist. I wonder what they're like. Are they interested in puppetry? What are they like? And you kind of find out about the person. You go like, yeah, they're into it. Or some people say, that, no, I could care less about puppets. I appreciate their honesty. I've called people up and they're like, no, thank you, but no, don't want to do it.
So what do you sort of look for in a puppeteer, or somebody that, let's say somebody wants to get into puppetry or to learn it, or they're just starting out, I mean, in terms of qualities, or, you know, their movement abilities, their thinking on their feet, their imaginations?
Yeah, with the auditions here at Emory, which were really extremely well organized, amazing considering the amount of people. We were both auditioning at the same time.
Yeah.
It's incredible. What I look for is, can they relate to the object? You can be the best dancer, actor, performer, but if you can't put it into the object, it's going to be very limited as a puppeteer, because that's kind of the soul of the whole art form, is you have to take what's all on you and put it into this very abstract, complicated, heavy object that doesn't do what you want to do. Looking over at Scott, who for a while there, had a really horrible heavy puppet, but then, was able to, when we got it fixed, rock and rolled with it. But yeah, it's that kind of fearlessness.
Yeah, there is something about trying to, really sort of not only translating your understanding of the puppet that you're manipulating, but actually, in a sense, wouldn't you say you become fascinated with the very life of the puppet that you are creating?
Yeah, that's a great moment in the puppeteer's. It's like you don't exist anymore, and the puppet is alive on its own, and you're just somehow involved, even though you've got your arm up inside of him. That's the greatest moment. The character, the puppet, is living on its own. You don't even exist. I hear that story over and over again with every style of puppeteer, even the Muppet folks. We just had Steve Whitmire was speaking about that very same thing. It's this persona that exists. Kermit really exists. Steve Whitmire is some guy who, has something to do with it, but when he puts on the puppet, it's Kermit lives.
Yeah, and we're actually, to watch Steve with Kermit, we watch Kermit.
Right, absolutely.
It doesn't really matter that his lips are moving or he's right next to it. We already accept the fact that it's alive. So I would think that whole process, too, as a puppeteer, actually having your own personal fascination about this living thing seeming.
It's the same with, I'll ask you a question with acting. Don't you feel like when you've had a really good performance, you feel like you weren't there, you wasn't there, but the character completely was in the moment?
Yeah, I think there's a point where and to me it's about listening. The more that I'm actually listening to what's being communicated to me and just living in that sort of dialogue world, then I begin to actually, function within the context of the storytelling rather than what my next line is, or I got to go pick that coffee cup up in 3 lines or whatever, which seems kind of silly to say, but it's actually true. We all think about those things in our responsibility of what we have to perform and what's decided upon and how it should be delivered, and yet at the same time there's this point.
That's the same thing with puppets too. The puppet's alive when something goes wrong, they notice it and they go over and they deal with it, and it's not, they just are alive.
Yeah, that really is the transforming point, you're right. That really is the point by which you begin to realize that you're actually totally within it.
Right.
Rather than just figuring out when I should turn the head and when the legs should move and all these other elements to it.
Yeah.
Do you, so in working with a young puppeteer, I suppose every puppeteer has their own kind of style as to how they approach things, just like actors do in their process. So like at the center, do you kind of shift them around to different people, or I guess it depends on the puppet, doesn't it?
It does.
The puppet actually demands more variation in what you learn than the puppeteer.
Yeah, the styles dictate a different skill set. The hand puppets, you need people with a lot of dexterity. There's certain styles, and then marionettes are the just hardest. There's very few string puppeteers anymore. Period. It's a kind of art form that's it's hard. That's the main thing, and so a lot of people don't do it. It's much easier to do the hand and rod style that we're all familiar with.
Mm-hmm.
When training with people, yeah, it's like, just do it. Keep doing it. Repetition is like playing an instrument. You just got to play the scales over and over and over and over and over until you're really confident with that style. Then about that time they give you another puppet. You have to learn all over again. Yeah. That's what happened to me. I learned the string puppets, and then you next show you get a different group of puppets, and it's, oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I discovered at the Puppet Center was that very notion of repetition.
Yeah.
Over and over. And I'm pretty used to repetition in my own work, but for example, running a play perhaps 3 times in one afternoon.
Yeah.
3 run-throughs in like a 5-hour period, which is not common for me as an actor working on a play. But it also reminded me of that discipline, that well, I think one run-through is fine, isn't it? I kind of got it.
Yeah.
But then it's like, well, you do, but you don't. And at it again. But it also reminded me of my own responsibility as an actor that I never really have it.
Yeah.
That if I go over it again, it may take more effort because perhaps I'm getting a little fatigued.
Mm-hmm.
But the fatigue is not the factor that's important. It's not important to take a rest. It's important to refine what it is that you're constantly setting for yourself.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard. It's like playing a concerto, and somebody says, "Here you go. Here's your violin," and you don't play the violin. If you're a beginner, we're going back to your question about what do you do with the beginners. You really have to spend a lot of time really working out the details. For me, it was on-the-job training. They just threw me into it. It's like, here you go, and you just learn. You sink or swim. Mm-hmm. A lot of sinking.
Yeah, there would seemingly be like, well, you kind of go here and you work on this particular element for a long time, and actually in the reality of the theater and in the puppet theater, it's you get thrown into the pool, and you need to start swimming and
That's the way a lot of people learn.
done.
They just do it, and you get better as you go along. You work with people who are a lot better than you. You can take classes with people who really experienced in a certain style, but so much of it is just discovery, just getting in there, committing to it.
So do you? So obviously, in putting a production on, if you've got a new puppeteer in the mix,
I'll give them a small part. I won't overwhelm them with a lead or something. I've worked with a lot of people. We'll have shows that'll have a lot of singing and dancing, and maybe I'll give them more of the singing and dancing, and then they'll slowly get folded in. The other thing that's good about ensemble work too is they will protect the new kid. They will help them constantly. As the directors, you're out front. You can't see them half the time. They're not even visible, so you don't know what's going on. But your ensemble will say, hey, here's the easy way to do this. They know all the tricks. It's always like, how simple can you do it? And they'll support each other, and they'll survive it. It's amazing how at first they seem shell-shocked. The actors usually just seem like, oh my God, what have I got myself into? Can I quit?
Yeah, I mean, that really is sort of the other side of the collaboration, is how the team, the cast works together to look out for each other.
They have to. There's so much. I mean, this company takes care of each other so much. They're constantly moving. And when we talk about deals being made, I can't get to this. Can you? Yeah, I'll get to that. But then you can get this for me because I can't get there. And you make these deals. I see XT over here just nodding their head. Yeah, it's all about making deals. And it gets easier as you go through it. It gets simpler. It really does. It feels like, I remember my first puppet show, I thought I was going to die. I mean, I really. And this was back in the day when it was the typical screaming puppet master. It was, like something out of Pinocchio, just breathing fire down your neck. And just. That's how I learned, man. That's how I learned. It was just like, why am I here? And you know, it's stressful enough as it is, just itself. But eventually you do get better. You get better by the constant doing it. And your confidence really starts to boost. And then when you're working again, next time you do one of these, it's a little bit easier.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah. Yeah, there is an interesting work ethic that happens in what we do.
Yeah.
That actually, the work ethic not only increases the quality of your work, but it actually increases your reputation amongst other artists for future work.
Right.
And I think that's another sort of element in collaboration we don't really sort of talk about, is that kind of work ethic as a team, or what you offer individually into a performance, actually sets you up for how people respond to the quality of your work, that eventually gets you, you know, a good reference to another project similar to it, or somebody said, I really liked what they did in this, or how they dealt with this, or et cetera, these positive kind of elements that in our line of work, it's half of our work is by reference.
Yeah.
Do you know somebody that can do this? Oh yeah, you should call up so-and-so. Strangely enough, so even with all the auditioning that artists do, this sort of,
Sure.
in a sense, benefit of collaborating as artists has to do with that other element too.
Yeah. 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 It's a small enough community too, so everybody kind of knows everybody else's work in a way, and you, yeah, like I said earlier, I'll see an actor, and I'll go like, gosh, they're really interesting. What do they like to be with, you know, and can give them
Yeah,
an
and
audition.
it really comes down to that often, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it really comes down to how focused somebody is, how cooperative someone is, how prepared they are. I mean, that
Yeah.
kind of thing
Yeah.
that you sort of, in a sense, have seen their artistic abilities.
Right.
And then comes this other element that is so crucial to the collaborative effort.
It's critical. You don't have to pull performances out of people. I mean, it's no fun. You want somebody who's going to play along with you, go along with the game, whatever it is. You know, in scene work, you know, sometimes, you know, I mean, you've worked with people in scenes where they're just not, you know, they're like in this other, they're doing this and you're doing this, and, you know, it's not syncing. And how can we get on the same page here?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have any questions at all?
What inspired you to do, you know, the same production again, and what worked better this time? Or, I mean, you said it's a lot bigger set, or did you find different moments in it?
Yeah, what motivated me to do it was John gave me the opportunity to come up with something, and this has been sitting in a warehouse for 14 years. All the puppets were built, a lot of the props, and it just dawned on me. Yes, you know, he gave me carte blanche. I could have done anything, and so I said, "But wait a minute, I've got a whole show just sitting here that only got a very short run for the Olympics." So that was motivation. Why not bring it back?
Well, and you had also said at the time, you said, you know, I'd always thought of this production as something that would really be cool on a college campus and with college students performing in it.
Yeah.
That was one of the interesting things I remember about that initial conversation about this play.
Yeah, because it was nice, and we actually expanded it. You know, at first there was only 4 puppeteers that I needed, but I asked John, and I said, like, well, why not get more people involved? Which immediately expanded it, and that opened it up to a much bigger staging than it originally was. And like, it also gave me a new character, the Mrs. Death, I call her, her name is Maman Brigitte, Iliana Marianas, and it was like, she had such a great movement, had great movement, and I thought, well, I could put her in the puppet role, but why not give Death Mrs. Death? Maybe he needs a wife, you know, this would be fun to have this other character, and it brought this whole other side of this story, because it's a very male, you know, the monster and Victor, very kind of men doing manly, monsterly things. And then it was like this whole other, female, which is part of the ritual, because it's always, you know, there's both sides. You have the male and you have the female, and this kind of gave us the female, and she really brought in this other energy and focus to it. And also, she was kind of making comments the whole time. She's sort of laughing at Victor's troubles, because they're all self-inflicted. Really, he kind of did it to himself. So yeah, that was something that really opened up quite a bit. And the students brought a lot of their, it's like, here's the scene, what are we going to do? The whole, I want a woman, the whole, the scene where they come out and when he's trying to create a woman, he was there, and it was totally improvised. I said, I don't know what this scene's about. I have no idea. He wants a date. That's all I know. He wants a female. And I always thought, well, he's always hanging around. When Victor was making him, he's always hanging around on the periphery. I thought, well, he'd said he wanted her just as ugly as him, but maybe not that ugly. Maybe, a little nice. And so I said, that's all I know. That's it. You guys figure out what it is. And they did. They just totally came up with this whole routine on their own. And it's great. It's better than anything I could have come up with. It's fantastic. Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the collaboration between the musicians and the actors and you? Yeah.
This was like 3/4 of the original band. The fourth one couldn't because he was doing a show at our theater, unfortunately. So I'd worked with all of them before. In the beginning, though, we had nothing. We had no music. We knew we wanted some kind of voodoo-style drumming, which we researched. And they would go off in a room somewhere and just bang away, and then come back and they'd watch us rehearse, and we would talk about it. We'd say, like, well, what is the feel supposed to be like? What's happening here? We need something really dramatic. Now it's really kind of quiet. They would watch what we were doing, go off, noodle, come back. Sometimes we'd have this is like lyrics. They're all the lyrics, all the songs are, most of them are all from Mary Shelley's writing. So what do you do with that? It's like an antiquated language. What does it sound like? What does robbing a graveyard sound like? What does sawing things in half and stitching it back together sound like? So you had to really let them be very creative, and they are. They're amazing. They're all gifted musicians. Each one of them is a composer in his own right, and they're all brilliant.
Yeah, I think the balance. I mean, the song "My Secret."
Yeah.
All the digging up and all the sort of surgical stuff that goes on is really a fascinating balance, because it's a beautiful song.
It is.
It's a beautiful piece of music.
Something you're just bringing up too is important, and they know when to be quiet. You don't want to work with musicians that just want to blast. I mean, if they were just full volume the whole time, everybody would just leave. You can't. We'd never be able to hear anybody. So they know when to dovetail down, when to go into the transition, when to support the actors, when they just stay out of it. That takes really a very smart composer and musicians to know that. They're also theater musicians too. I don't make it sound like it, as opposed to the other kind, whatever that is. But they understand, nuances of, okay, this is just background music. No, this really is the scene. When to step back, and to be flexible. A lot of composers are not very flexible. I found not a lot, but I've run into those who are like, "This is my music, and that's it. If you don't like it, forget it." You're like, "Yeah, that's great, but it's supposed to be a happy scene, and this is really sad and Schoenberg, and I don't really want that."
And also the fact that when we decided to do it, that all the musicians who were involved in it, these are the original musicians, were incredibly, I don't think one of them paused before agreeing to do it.
Yeah.
They couldn't believe they actually had a second chance after 13, 14 years to go back at it and try it again. So I mean, that was a very interesting part of the original.
Right. They enjoyed it.
That they wanted to come back and
it was a unique blend for them.
And it just happened to be they were all in Atlanta at the same time.
Amazing.
Just sort of
a miracle.
Lucky. What else? Other questions?
You have a question?
I have one. John, clearly this is a blend of voodoo, the islands, and German lore via England, because of course it is an English book. Did that come to you visually, or did it come to you in an auditory way? I'm assuming that the blending of the two was your decision.
Yeah.
Or did it come from collaboration?
No, I'm all to blame for the crazy kind. It sounds like a bad B movie plot, Frankenstein and voodoo. It just sounds like, God Lord, some trashy movie. And trying to convince somebody this could really work. I had to. That was what the whole process was about. It could have been terribly stupid, but somehow it worked. It's sort of the more and I did a lot of research. I do a lot of research on everything I do. You know, we went to New Orleans. We met with a lot of practitioners. We hung out and met with a lot of people and really got into it with them and really studied it. And so I kind of got the culture, and I understood like the story and the voodoo culture. There's a lot of parallels in it, and it was sort of visual. I was thinking about Frankenstein and that he's like reanimated like a zombie or something. I started going, well, that's kind of interesting, and I wanted to take this like a ritualized version of a classical story, and to me, this African ecstatic. I mean, technically, it's African ecstatic religious ceremony, and we're not really. I mean, we're not pretending to be doing voodoo by any means. Sort of making up our own kind of thing. Well, we're definitely making up our own thing, but there were a lot of parallels, and the emotionalism, because you know, there's sort of although it's not really a Gothic novel, but it's you know, it has this like you said, hardcore imagery. The Karloff version, you know, all that, it has all this history behind it. And I really wanted something that would like totally explode it into another really visceral, in your face, right now, we're gonna get possessed and have a real good time. We even thought of getting a cadaver at one time. When we thought, God, if we could get a real cadaver and move it around like puppeteers, that'd be like... Yeah. The legal hassles were like, nah, nobody was.
I do recall that briefly floated around.
I know. I thought Emory University, they got a whole hospital. We could just come on, John, can't we just go over there and?
I don't think so.
Get one. But the comedy. Yeah, a lot of the crazy ideas are mine, and the Crucible is. You'll always come up with like crazy ideas, and then the real work is everybody kind of contribute to make sure will it work? You know, can you make this thing come together? Extrinsic values, they call it, I think, in directing class. I never took class, but there's intrinsic values, which are part of the work. Then there's like the extrinsic, and I'm always interested in like the craziest, you know, out here.
Well, the beaver in the canoe is probably the most extraordinary image that comes. Huh?
That came from we actually worked with we were able to work. We actually got a lot of taxidermy stuff for our set, and the guy had like every kind of animal in the world. But what fascinated me the most was his series of like beavers in canoes and frogs with violin. I mean, he had this whole other. So I just had to. Sort of an in-joke.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, you don't even need to know the joke.
Oh,
the
yeah,
joke,
it's just so outrageous.
It's so bizarre.
And even all this has, you know, relationship too. Like there's in the religion, there's like the cool side, the blues, and then you have the red hot science, you know, all on the other side, and it's very, very, very much in the voodoo tradition, the two different world views, again, the yin and yang.
Any other questions? Yeah.
I'm just wondering, I'm sure it's in a bio on you, but what was your original educational background or focus?
I was educated. I went to, I graduated from Columbia College in Chicago. I think it was their first year as I went to Northern Illinois University, then finished up there. I'm finished. But it was a great school because all of the professors were they were teaching during the day, but at night they had their own companies. They were doing shows all night and trying to earn a living. So it was very practical for me, you know, because they were really doing it. You know, there wasn't anybody in the staff who wasn't actually out there every night hoofing it on the board somewhere. So it was cool.
And when did you come here? Atlanta.
Oh, Atlanta, good Lord, 77? No. 78 is when the center opened up.
Right.
Got a job. Puppeteer wanted Will Train. Thought it's better than, you know, doing the menial labor I've been doing. So Still training 31 years later, still every day.
Other questions?
Any other questions at all?
Comments?
Thank you so very much.
Yay, thank you. Yay. Dude.
I'll ask you to stay around for a minute in case somebody wants to ask a private question.
Oh, sure.
Something of the sort. And otherwise, I will see you guys after the break.
Yay.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.